Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Maddie with Mad DIY Marketing. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are so excited to have you with us for our first episode of The Digital Shelf, Cottage Food Law. What products can I sell without a commercial kitchen? Presenting today are Antonio Alonzo, Executive Director of Fund 17, and Kim Bousquet, Chief Operating Officer at Startup Food Biz. The Digital Shelf webinar series is a collaboration between Mad DIY Marketing, Fund 17, Propeller, Food Policy Advisory Committee, and the Recirculation Farm Coalition. We developed this series to provide guidance and insight and help for food businesses navigating the unknowns of the new consumer marketplace that COVID-19 has placed us in. A few reminders before we get started. Please keep your videos off and your microphones on mute. And we have a poll that we'll be doing very shortly after Antonio and Kim introduce themselves, and then another poll right before the Q&A. Please take some time to answer this. It will help us gain insight into what you've learned during our episode. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope we'll see you again at our other episodes, and I'll now hand it over to Antonio and Kim to start the webinar. Enjoy.
Sure. Well, Kim is going to go first. So I'm dialing in separately, by the way, to avoid, sorry, I'm dialing in separately. Can y'all hear me? All right, I'm going to just talk through my computer.
So Kim is going to go first. I think I'll just go myself to not beleaguer the point when I start presenting later. But I'm Antonio Alonzo. I'm the Executive Director at Fund 17. I'm very passionate about food business, and so I'm really excited to be putting on this series. I've worked in food policy and on some urban farming projects, so that's just a little bit of my background, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kim, and in just a second you'll see a poll pop up.
Great, thanks Antonio and Maddie, I really appreciate that. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Can everybody hear me okay? Antonio, are we good?
Yes, I can hear you well. Sorry, I just realized I have too many microphones, so it was a little low, but I can hear you well.
No problem. It might take me a second to get to my screen sharing, but I promise that I will get to it. Okay. All right, and Antonio, again, please let me know if something looks off or something is messed up with my presentation. I'm happy to stop and fix it. All right.
Okay, so, I'm seeing the Zoom sign-in window right now.
Okay. I'm sorry, I don't know how that happened. Can you see?
I think if you unshare and then reshare, you can select a different window to share.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. So now that we've got all the tech bugs out of the way, my name is Kim Bousquet, and I'm here with Startup Food Biz today to talk to you about cottage food laws. Startup Food Biz is a legal and regulatory educational resource company that's dedicated to providing food entrepreneurs access to inexpensive educational resources to help them get their business off the ground. We're a startup too. We were funded by, and we are funded by a USDA grant to provide these resources to folks like you. And so if you get the chance, we'd appreciate you checking out our website at startupfoodbiz.com. I am also an attorney. I've been practicing law for 14 years now and in private practice. So, my day job is being an attorney. My other day job is startup food biz. So I'm speaking to you from both perspectives today as an attorney with startup food biz and also an attorney that does ag and food law. Okay, so today's agenda is pretty simple and straightforward. We got two goals. One is to educate about what cottage food laws are, and two is to talk about the Louisiana specific rules that are a little bit different from what the general cottage food laws are. And my primary goal in kind of doing both of these things together is to give you a broad context of what cottage food laws are, and then that can show you how Louisiana fits into the other, to the broad, different jurisdictional rules on food laws, cottage food laws, and it'll help us kind of understand why things are different in Louisiana. Okay, so what are cottage food laws? Well, for one, they're state laws, and they allow sales of certain types of foods made in a home kitchen in a limited volume. And we'll go through kind of each one of these like underscored things because it is a limited type of food and a limited amount of food you can sell made from your home kitchen. And if you follow these rules and you meet the requirements, then that means that you're going to be exempt from a lot of laws that you would otherwise have to comply with. Okay, so what is the point of these, right? I just told you that if you do this, then you don't have to comply with some laws, and you might think that's kind of a bad idea. But actually, the way the process is structured actually turns out to be a pretty good idea. Cottage food laws essentially allow people to create a business of their own in their home without a whole bunch of startup costs and without having to comply with a whole bunch of red tape. And the way that they can do this successfully is by having a low risk involved. So the products that you are able to make from your home-based food business are not products that are really concerning from a food safety perspective. You're not going to be able to, sell raw meat on a food side stand. And so with that limited food safety issue, then you can have a decreased amount of regulatory oversight. So you don't, it'd be overkill to make these home-based food businesses comply with a bunch of regulations that really aren't going to provide any more safety than what we're already getting from the business already. And, the decreased fees and everything allows these businesses to thrive without having to spend a bunch of money and outlay on that. All right, and you can see that it's a really popular topic because all states except for New Jersey have a cottage food law, and DC has one as well. And the reason that I want to share with you a lot of the variations today in the overview is because you need to know if you're going to try to open a cottage food law in your own jurisdiction, or a cottage food practice in your own jurisdiction, that there's going to be a lot of different variations on the laws. And so having a broad-based perspective what the laws are generally will help you when you're looking at your specific jurisdiction to say, oh, what's unique about this and how do I need to comply with this particular jurisdiction? And since 2015, there have been 19 states and DC that have either adopted or evolved their cottage food law in a very significant way. And what that tells us is that this is an emerging area of law, and it's also a very important area of law. And you're going to see a lot of changes until they finally start to get things right and things settle down. But until that happens, there's still going to be a lot of changes in the laws. So it's always good to check your resources and make sure that you're using the current versions. One great resource I found that you're going to see referenced in this presentation is the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic Guide to Cottage Food Laws. And I've linked it here in the presentation, and I'm assuming you'll get a copy of this. If not, you can ask one of the providers here for that, and I'm happy to share this presentation. Also, Startup Food Biz, here's another plug for my company. We have some great resources on our website and are able to help out with entrepreneurs looking for inexpensive ways to get great information on their food business. Okay, while we're talking today, we're talking mainly about the food-related aspects of the food law-related aspects of cottage food laws, but I want you to always keep in mind that there's other things, other laws, other rules, other regulations that you're always going to have to be mindful of when you're creating any business. And so it's important to always pay attention to what your zoning laws say in particular. For myself and for probably a lot of people there, I live in a historic neighborhood, and there are very specific rules on what you can do in terms of signage in particular in your historic neighborhood. So that, and there's just a lot of various things that will be in a zoning code that you'll need to pay attention to. And some places you might require an exemption or a variance. And I think potentially Antonio is going to get involved in a little bit of that because he's going to be talking on the city aspects. If not, just know that that's something you need to pay attention to. State tort law. I am a litigator by nature, and I'm always thinking about how you can be sued. And I know it's not likely for cottage food businesses to be sued, but I defend a lot of food companies, and I can tell you right now that lawyers like to target any size of company, whether they're teeny tiny or huge multinational. And the main things that I'm seeing in litigation are relating to labeling and foodborne illnesses. And so my advice to any food client is to make sure you're practicing those good hygiene when you're making your products. And also your labels need to be truthful and accurate at all times. If you're going to make a claim about gluten-free or about organic or allergies or anything like that, you really need to make sure that your label is accurate. One, you don't want to get anybody sick, and two, you don't want to invite litigation or a lawsuit against you that could really be a problem. Okay, so obviously the number one question you want to ask when you're starting a business is, what type of food can I sell? Generally speaking, you're going to be able to do baked goods. You're going to be able to do dry baked mixes, granola, popcorn, cereals, and of course your basics, jams and jellies and pickles and other fermented foods. Those are the kind of things. Think about, when you go to the farmer's market, what do you see there? It's pretty much those things, right? You pick up your favorite jam at the farmer's market. That's going to be something that's covered by a cottage food law. What can't I sell? Basically, if something is perishable or involves meat or animals, that's a definite no. You can't supply your local neighborhood with meat popsicles, basically. Fresh cut fruit, anything that requires refrigeration, fish products. Juices is a big one. No orange juice, right? But it's kind of interesting because some states have specifically allowed lemonade stands. You've probably seen reports of kids getting, their lemonade stand shut down. So one exception to the juice law is some states allow lemonade stands, in case that was something you're really interested in. Okay, I'm bringing up this Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, this figure 1 from there, because I think it is sort of helpful for us to think about context, allowed and not allowed. So there's really 2 types of ways that states will do the allowed and not allowed list. Some of them will say you are not allowed to sell, dangerous food, basically hazardous food, which includes meat, something like that. But that's like non-exclusive list, right? There's other things that may qualify as hazardous that aren't on the list that you might need to be worried about. So just because your law, your state law says something like that doesn't mean that you produce a product that's not on that list, doesn't mean you're good to go. You really need to double check and make sure that there's not something in that food that could potentially be hazardous, that could cause a foodborne illness. The other way that states do it is a flip. So like Louisiana, states say you can sell X, Y, and Z. That's a much clearer rule, much easier to understand and follow. And so it looks like about half and half of states kind of go one way or the other. And I think the second way is really the best way to say you are allowed to sell baked goods. And that just makes more sense and is a clearer way to do things. Okay. After you figure out what you can sell, right, you need to figure out, okay, where and how am I allowed to sell this? So there's really 2 kinds of ways to sell your product, right? One is direct to consumers, which is like, again, the farmer's market example, or bake sale, or even a roadside stand. That's the kind of, you're selling directly to whoever wants to eat your product. The other way that you can sell, and probably the more lucrative way, is to sell it to a reseller. So like a grocery store or a wholesaler or somebody who's going to market the product for you. And that is a little more challenging to get approved. Some states say no to that entirely, and some states say, well, some things you're allowed to sell through a reseller, and some things you're not. So again, that's another area where your state is going to be very nuanced. Online sales is also another big question. As you know, online sales is the way to go nowadays, especially in the COVID times. But it is not clear in a lot of situations, in a lot of states, whether or not you can sell your products online. What is absolutely clear, though, however, is that if you are going to sell online, you have to keep it in the state that you are producing this in. If you produce something and you sell it to other states outside of your own state, you are looking at potential federal law issue and the FDA, and you definitely don't want to get involved with any issues with the federal government. So whether or not your product is allowed to be sold online in your state, definitely make sure that you're finding a way to keep it sold within your state and that it's not traveling outside of your state. Going back to this Cottage Food Law presentation or publication by the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, this figure 2 kind of gives you a little bit more context too for what I was just talking about. So it shows the states that sell both indirect sales. And Louisiana is actually on here. Louisiana is an interesting bird, and we'll get to that too in a second. They have a unique view on what baked goods in particular. And you can see that those states that are in the first column there, or the first column to the right, so you can sell things in both direct to consumer, i.e. farmer's market, or via resale, or i.e. grocery store. The states in the second column there allow basically for direct to consumer sales only, so farmer's market, right? And then the bottom one is sort of a hybrid. It allows for direct to consumer sales at limited venues. So again, within direct to consumer sales, there might be some limitations on what you can sell and what you can't sell. So again, this is just like another plug for check your state law. All right, so moving on, we've answered our main questions. What can we sell and where can we sell it? You're probably not thinking about how are you going to get in trouble or how are you going to get exempted from this whole process. If you are very successful and your business is really taking off, you might need to really pay attention to your sales volumes, because most cottage food laws will have a limitation of how much food you can sell before you are no longer qualified under the cottage food law to receive those the benefits of the cottage food law, which are, you know, less government oversight, etc. Because once you meet certain thresholds or tiers, you will then have to basically comply with the normal rules of food business, which again are very expensive and require a lot more. You know, probably you'll have to go get a kitchen somewhere, and so you really want to, once your business starts taking off, pay attention to how much gross sales you're making per year. In Louisiana, it's $20,000. So once you start making $20,000 per year gross sales in Louisiana, you are no longer going to be able to qualify for the cottage food law. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. This next slide is again a cutout from Cottage Food Law's Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, showing again the variations in the state law sales limits. 10,000 is the lowest rung, I believe. So it looks like Colorado, South Dakota, Vermont, Virginia, and Wisconsin have a $10,000 limitation, above which you get kicked out of the cottage food law land. And it actually looks like a lot of states don't have a limitation, but I would be very curious to see how long those last. I think that there's, you know, the point to having a sales limitation is so that big businesses don't come in and take advantage of these lax or more lax cottage food laws. So I wonder if there's going to be some shifting later on in sales limits, depending on, you know, kind of how the market goes in the future. If a lot of people start doing a cottage food business, maybe that'll change. Maybe they'll say, hey, this, you know, these laws weren't intended to be for unlimited, huge businesses. We're going to limit the sales. So that's something to pay attention to in the future. Okay. So again, thinking about the exemptions we have from some of the regular laws, it's still important to know that a lot of states still require some sort of permitting or certification or business license, et cetera. You can't just start selling, usually you can't just start selling a product without doing some sort of paperwork. And so the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, again, a plug for them. They've created this little figure 3, which is sort of a outline of what is required by various states. Some states require a food handler safety certification course. I don't know if anybody's done that. I did that, and it's a Serve Safe course. Basically, anybody who's opening a restaurant business in your state has to go through this Serve Safe and has to have all of their, usually all of your employees go through this process as well. It's kind of helpful because it at least teaches everyone, how to be safe with food and time and temperature controls and all that. But that's not a very big, not many states require that, but some states will, so it's good to pay attention. Other states, there isn't any requirement for registration or permitting or anything. I think Antonio may have some comments on that in regards to Louisiana cities, but so again, it's important to just sort of pay attention to whether or not you have to go out and get a permit or not. Labeling. Just because you are taking advantage of the Cottage Food Law does not mean that you don't have any labeling requirements. They're usually not very involved. In fact, they're pretty much so simple that you could do them on your own printer at home, which I imagine if you're doing a cottage food law or cottage food business, you're probably going to do that anyway. Again, this is a very important consideration. If you are selling outside of your state, that is a whole different issue. These cottage food laws and your production of a home-based food, it needs to be limited to your sales need to be limited to inside of your state. And that is important for the laws, and in particular for labeling laws. There are a lot of federal labeling requirements, and if you don't comply with them, you could get into serious trouble. So I just wanted to really emphasize that make sure you sell your product in your own state. Some states don't have any labeling requirement at all. Usually you have to say, what the name and address of who you are. I mean, you want that anyway because you're going to sell, you want people to come back and buy your stuff. So that makes sense. The common or usual name of a product is often required, and common or usual name, you can look at what federal law says that common usual name is. That common or usual name is kind of a federal law term. But again, you're not selling some sort of crazy concoction of food. You're going to sell something very simple. So cake, honey, bread mix. Those are all pretty safe names to use. Some states do require you to put ingredients. Very, very few, I think, though, would be the case there. Some require allergens listed, the 8 major allergens, which again, if you Google 8 major allergens or you look at Startup Food Biz, you'll know which ones need to be listed. Net weight and volume is kind of standard as well. Sometimes in Louisiana, you will have to say something like here on this last entry here, which is food was not produced in a licensed or regulated facility, just to let people know, you're taking a risk. Okay, now that we've kind of looked at general basics of cottage food law overall, let's take a quick peek into what Louisiana is doing. Louisiana is one of the states that basically says if you are producing a low risk food, then you will, and there's other requirements, obviously, that you can go ahead and sell those out of your home-based, business, basically. And Louisiana is also one of the states that defines what those low-risk foods are. And so I've listed them out here, but basically it's your baked goods, candies, cane syrup, dried mixes, honey and honeycomb products, jams, jellies, preserves, pickles and acidified foods, sauces and syrups, spices, You see that's a little bit different from the main list that we saw before. In particular, the addition of, cane syrup, I think is interesting. That's on there, and there's another rule on cane syrup that we'll talk about in a minute too. But the interesting thing about Louisiana is they have a lot of special rules on breads, cakes, cookies, and pies. I'm not sure what caused that to be the case. Maybe there was some major outbreak of a foodborne illness that happened with breads, cakes, cookies, or pies. But for whatever reason, Louisiana has very unique rules on those that I haven't seen in other states. For example, if you prepare breads, cakes, cookies, or pies, and you employ somebody or hire somebody to help you do that, you cannot take advantage of the cottage food laws. So by implication, that means if you hire somebody to do help in any of the other things like making candies or cane syrup, that's okay to, you could still comply with the cottage food law, but just not, baked goods basically. So it's a little strange, but that's the implication of that little exception there. All right, so just to run through a few basics of Louisiana's cottage food law, it only applies where your gross sales are below $20,000. So again, if your business is looking at really taking off, or you've got a huge base of customers ready to go buy your special sauce, pay attention to your sales in terms of the cottage food law. The only label requirement in Louisiana is that it must say, quote, not produced in a licensed or regulated facility. There's no allergen label requirement. There's no ingredients requirement. You might want to put those things on there, but the only thing that the law says you must have is this little phrase here. And of course, there's always an exception, right? So here there's an exception for raw honey that is not processed in any way. So that means you don't have to put that phrase, not produced in a licensed or regulated facility. So for honey, there really is no rules on what you have to say on your label. The interesting thing about filing things and paperwork, I said there was paperwork requirements, right? In Louisiana, you have to register with the parish tax collector to collect a local sales tax. So you can't get rid of your sales tax obligations. You got to pay taxes and you got to go register. That is a prerequisite to doing anything with your business. You got to get registered. Another interesting thing with Louisiana is the foods, even though, if you're baking a pie, you can't put animal muscle protein in it or fish protein in it. That's going to exclude it from the definition of, from the eligibility of the low risk food. Interesting thing about it, I keep saying there's interesting things, and they are all very interesting things about Louisiana law. But the home, for purposes of cane sugar production, is unique. And I assume, I'm not from Louisiana, but I'm sure that some of you are, and you're probably nodding your head going, there is a unique way to make cane sugar in Louisiana. And if you know about that unique way, then you probably know what this exception here is referring to, saying that home can be something other than the house. It can be a structure that is used in the traditional preparation of cane syrup in Louisiana. So if you are wanting to do cane syrup, have no fear, you can still have a structure that's outside of your home. Basics, again, I mentioned earlier, there's special rules for breads, cakes, cookies, and pies. And I'm obviously not going to go through all these because that would be kind of boring, put everyone to sleep. But I think it's interesting. What's interesting about how Louisiana does breads, cakes, cookies, and pies is that it actually kind of sets out a lot of the rules that you would see in a normal food law or food code for example, a restaurant, or for production of an FDA regulated facility. They say things like, you have to protect your openings against flies and vermin. You have to exclude vermin from your building. You have to have specific refrigeration requirements. And those are things that you would see when you're doing a restaurant or something like that. What I think is interesting, though, is that sort of implies that the other things you're making don't actually have to have these requirements. For example, the specific rule in Louisiana is you're not allowed to have domestic pets where your food preparation and baking occurs, but query whether or not you're allowed to have domestic pets when you're making pickles. I mean, so the fact that they specifically call out these baked goods sort of implies that maybe you don't have to follow these rules for other things. But I think that may be a bridge too far, because you probably should not have domestic pets, when you're making your pickles or whatever else you're doing. So again, I'd like to know if Antonio or anybody else knows, please, at the end of this, let me know why Louisiana is very, concerned about home-based breads or cookies or cakes. If anybody knows, I'd love to hear why. Again, this slide here is just to kind of point out that there's all kinds of very specific things about breads, cakes, cookies, and pies that Louisiana is very concerned about. This is not something that exists for the other home-based food products you can make. So if that's what you want to do in Louisiana, you're gonna have to be a little more careful and have a little more boxes to check when you're setting up your home food-based business. Again, another interesting thing about making these home-based breads, cakes, cookies, and pies, you can do them with custard and cream-filled products, but remember how I said earlier that you can't do milk and milk-based products? Well, you can make breads, cakes, cookies, and pies with custard and kind of milk-based ingredients baked into them. But you have to do it in a very specific manner. It has to be pasteurized. It has to have certain time and temperature controls. You have to have specific sanitation controls, similar to like you would have in a restaurant or a regular production facility. So again, they're taking this category of products that's a little bit more serious. Okay, can you have baked goods, baked in quotes? No. In Louisiana, they've specifically said that you cannot sell any food containing cannabis oil. And of course, this is CBD that we're talking about, unless the Food and Drug Administration approves it as an additive. So what that means is, unless and until the FDA comes out and says that CBD is legal in food products, you cannot use it in your baked goods in Louisiana. And you probably can't use it anywhere else, to be honest. It's just probably, there may be some exception under a state law, but CBD in foods, the FDA has specifically said you cannot use it in foods, regardless of whether or not it's approved in a state for usage. The FDA has issued a number of warning letters and has taken some enforcement actions against CBD products that are edible or that are, drinks, gummies, etc. So be very careful if you are trying to do some kind of CBD ingredient in your product. And that gets me back to going full circle now, back to the whole question of tort litigation as well. So not only would you have to worry about the FDA and regulatory questions, you'd also have to worry about being sued. There's a number of lawsuits right now that are pending against companies that have put CBD in their food products, for purity allegations or labeling claims, allegations. So again, it's just an area of law that is really hot, really booming right now, because there are a lot of companies that are putting CBD in food products that technically is not allowed under the FDA regulations and laws, even if a state allows that in their, even if a state has passed a recreational use law. A couple of other interesting things about Louisiana cottage food law that I'm assuming are very historical, kind of traditional in nature. There are at least four different types of food that have sort of always been, since the 70s and 80s, kind of exempt from a lot of regulation. And so you probably recognize some of these products that seem to be in a traditional food. that's made in Louisiana. And basically what these exceptions say are that you can make, for example, crabs, right? That would not normally be allowed under the cottage food law. But, if you're doing something in the traditional manner, in a way that it's been done, forever, then you are probably going to be okay under the food laws. You don't have to comply with a bunch of regulations. And for some reason, Italian food as well. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's always good to check check local regulations if there's some sort of really specific but maybe unique food that you want to make. It's always good to search in the regulations to find out if there's anything specific as to that food, because there often is. Okay, and just a couple of slides here. This is wrapping up my presentation. Protecting your brand. So obviously, brand new startup businesses don't have a lot invested in their brand at that point. But as you grow and as your products sell and you're doing well, you might be, a little more concerned about protecting your investment in your brand. The brand is obviously one of the most important things that you have in terms of value for your product and for your business. And you should be thinking, since now, really, how you're going to protect your brand. And that includes recipes, that includes your name, your logo, your slogan. So some things have to be protected by trade secrets. So like a recipe, you need to make sure you keep that under wraps. That is a trade secret. If you need to make sure that employees keep that information. You have NDAs and you have things, so that your employees can't share your recipes. For other things, so like logos and business name, you really should consider getting a trademark. So a trademark is something that you can register with this government, and it shows that you have ownership of that particular, that logo, or that phrase can be trademarked. So like McDonald's, right? That's a trademarked name, and even the M's is trademarked. And there's cases, lots of cases where companies have tried to use the M and have been sued, and McDonald's has won. So again, it's just really important for you to think about what is your brand and how are you going to protect it from the beginning. It's something that you should think about. And that is it for my presentation. I hope that you've got at least one or two things, nuggets of good information that might be helpful in your business from this presentation. And you can certainly let me know if you haven't. And you can also let me know if there's anything else that you want to hear about. Feel free to check out startupfoodbiz.com, and there's a contact information on there. I think it sends you to our regular mailbox, but certainly, send an email to myself, Kim Bousquet, or Pat is the owner of the company, and we'd be happy to kind of work with you a little bit more on your business. And yes, is that Antonio?
Yes, that's me.
Okay, I'll stop share, and then you can take it over.
Great. Yeah, and thank you so much. I was so intrigued by the presentation you put together as we were preparing for this webinar, because there are a lot of very unique Louisianian stipulations to our cottage food law in Louisiana. So that was so cool to see. I think we can answer one question now and then go into my portion, and then we'll do Q&A after. But there's a question, is elderberry allowed? And so I believe like the syrup version of elderberry would be allowed, as well as the produce, but not cut. So that's, yeah, so I don't see any disagreement with Kim. All right, well, so I'm going to talk a little bit about just again, I'm Antonio Alonzo from Fund 17. I'm the executive director here. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the context in New Orleans, specifically about selling food under cottage law and some of the practical steps you would need to take before doing so. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right, can everyone see a presentation? Looks black to me.
I can see it starts with in New Orleans.
Yes, okay,
Yep,
great.
I see it.
All right, well, so a lot of states don't allow selling to restaurants and to stores that then resell the products or incorporate it into their ingredients. Louisiana is one of the states that does allow that. So that's something to consider. However, keeping in mind that it's not very common. Restaurants and stores are usually really concerned about food safety. They want businesses to have fancy, like a recall plan in place and insurance set up with liability insurance. So just keep in mind that you may find some venues locally that are going to be able to resell your products, but you may not be able to. There are a number of restaurants that are interested, some that at least I've heard about, working with entrepreneurs. I'm not sure if I want to share any specific names, but there are restaurants that are very interested in incorporating locally produced ingredients. So you may find some luck with that. For example, if a restaurant wants to put together a farmer's market omelet, so to speak, they'll look for locally sourced produce to do that. But for those, and you may also be able to find a small cafe that sells a baked good to products, to customers as a product at the counter. But with that in mind, selling direct to consumer through open air markets and farmers markets is a more common avenue for selling products. So with COVID-19, there's a scarcity of these opportunities right now. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. As far as I know right now, the one farmers market continuing to operate is Crescent City Farmers Market. And when it comes to farmers markets generally, I don't want to speak about Crescent City Farmers Market specifically, but they are likely going to be prioritizing those products that are jams, jellies, produce, and fermented foods, and not as much the baked goods and other categories. They are going to be thinking about the farmers that are in their market, so they may not want you to be selling products that are in competition or where there's an overabundance. And so you also might need to partner with another group in order to get this opportunity. So for example, you might need to find a co-op that does have liability insurance, because farmers markets, being a food market, often put in place higher requirements for vendors that are selling through them. I will go to the next slide. And so here are some boxes to check, so to speak, when you are selling in New Orleans. Since this is a state law, one of the requirements that they have are paying for both state and city taxes on your sales. So you're going to need your state tax certificate. You're going to need to get a business license from the city. You're going to need to get the city tax certificate. And in some circumstances, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you're also going to need a vendor's permit. And I'll go to the next slide. So this is the practical steps toward getting those things in place. So before you get your state tax certificate, you will need to register your business. You can do this at this website, gobiz.sos.la.gov. Go on there, create an account, reserve your name. If you're registering an LLC, then you'll have to, after that, go to irs.gov and then register it there, and you'll get a tax ID. If you're registering a sole proprietorship, you will be able to use your social security number as your tax ID on documentation. And so once you have that tax ID set up and the LLC finalized or the sole proprietorship finalized on GoBiz, you can then go to this website, latap.revenue.louisiana.gov, and register for your tax certificate. That will set you up to start paying state tax. And then you're going to need a business permit from the city. So more recently, this is something that I encourage you to familiarize yourselves with. I still need to take a look myself, but the city has posted an online portal where some of these registrations can take place, and the general occupational license is listed there. So I would encourage you to try to do this online before going to City Hall, which was how this was done before. But you're going to want to register a home-based business license. This is with the One-Stop Department. It's $190, and just keep in mind that it's a little confusing. So there's the general occupational license, and the same application for that is the application that you use for the home-based business license. The difference is that with a home-based business license, you are registering a residential address. If you are talking to city staff and you're asking about getting an occupational license and you register a commercial address, you're likely to they're going to ask for additional documentation around where you are producing your food, and that's going outside of Cottage Food Law. So make sure you're securing that home-based business license. They're going to want additional documentation on the facility where you're producing your food. Once that's done, from the City Department of Revenue, you can secure your tax certificate. When doing it in person, this was a important thing to keep in mind, so you don't make multiple visits to City Hall. But if you are registering the LLC and you're paying by check, make sure you're using a check from a checkbook. It needs to have the LLC name printed at the top. It can't be a temporary check from the bank. And then the $50 fee is basically a deposit on your sales tax to the city. So you start your balance with -50 and continue to pay your sales tax from there as you make sales and track your sales. So how do we actually pay sales tax? I will put this in the chat. There's an additional website. Let me see, actually, if I could just pull it up 1 second, and if so, I'll do it now. So when we enter into Q&A, I'll pull the link and put it in the chat, but you'll be able to create a account where you can pay both city and state tax. So the vendor permit. So this is also something that is happening much less right now. because of COVID-19 and different restrictions. But when selling at a festival, what's called the promoter or the organizer of the festival is required to get a special events permit. And then under that permit, the vendors at the festival can register a vendor permit with the city, and that's just $50. The special events permit, if you go asking for that, you're going to see a much higher number, more like $500. So you would be asking for a vendor permit in this case. And then doing some additional research there, there are options to sell food at second lines, Mardi Gras parades, and mobile vending permits. However, the requirements are higher, and it's not really something covered under traditional cottage food law. So let's see that. You're currently in the first webinar for our digital shelf series. If you're looking at the chat, you'll see where Maddie has referenced another webinar when Kim was talking about branding. We are going to have a branding webinar on September 30th, so I definitely recommend that. And then we're doing a couple more webinars that I think this audience would be interested in that I wanted to highlight. So on October 14th, we're going to be featuring Restoring Farms and Top Box Food to talk about some emerging local markets for food businesses. And then on the 28th, we'll be doing different e-commerce platforms. We'll have Nola Cajun on as well to talk about their e-commerce platform. Something that we didn't fully research when preparing this presentation, but I saw right before was permitted was selling online. So there is some level of selling permitted within Louisiana under cottage food law. It looked like there was maybe a restriction preventing you from selling across state lines. Just something to keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll, and this will help us sort of track the takeaways from today's webinar, and we can go ahead and do Q&A. I believe, so yes, I see a question. If I have an LLC, will I also need a city permit? And yes, you will also need to register a city permit. So the LLC is a state registration, and the city permit is registering that LLC with the city to get a business permit. So that would be called the home-based business license if you're in Orleans Parish. There's another one. Is there a specific state contact for cottage food law questions? I'm not sure if there's like a specific government person and who would be the person to answer that. Kim, do you know?
I don't really know, but my understanding, and I'm sure you know more than I do, but even like for the restaurants and such, those are, even though they're state regulated, they're still, the programs are run through the various parishes. So my assumption would be that would be who you would talk to. You wouldn't necessarily go to the State Department. Does that sound at all consistent with your thoughts, Antonio?
Yeah, I think there's probably, when registering the home-based business license, there's a lot of text on there around cottage food law regulations. So there's likely a city contact that can answer some of those questions from that perspective. I also know that there tends to be the Louisiana Department of Health New Orleans division based in Benson Tower is often answering these questions when it concerns state law. So I would look into that office as well. Great. Well,
One question. This is Maddie. I received a personal question from someone, and they were wondering about chocolate bars, chocolate candies. Are these types of products allowed under Cottage Food Law?
do you know if that would qualify as a baked good, Kim, or if the dairy might prevent it?
Good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Hmm. I I'd have to think more about that one. I can do some research and check that out. I'm not sure. Someone is asking chocolate covered strawberries. I think that'd be a harder sell because I think those probably do have to be refrigerated. Um, I don't know. I can look into that and get back.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love to just send out a follow-up email to attendees with any open questions we
Yeah,
can't answer on the call.
absolutely.
All right. Well, I'll just prolong the awkward silence a little bit more. Do we have any other questions from the audience, or maybe anything someone would like to share about their experience with Cottage Food Law or in what we shared today? Wish I could see if people were typing. All right. Well, we've hit 6:30. Um, I've gotten through my content. Kim's gotten through her content. I appreciate everyone who's been an avid attendee. Looks like we had a popular kickoff event to our webinar series. If you'd at any time want to see the entire list of webinars that are coming up, you can go to fun17.org/thedigitalshelf, and you'll see our upcoming webinars there. I'd also, before y'all sign off, want to encourage you again to complete the poll. If we could just get a couple more folks to complete it, that would help us. That's what our funder for this webinar series is looking for, just a minimum amount of responses on these polls. And thank you, Maddie. Yes, we'll be sending a follow-up email after this to everyone, and also follow up on those questions. So this recording will be available to attendees as well. We'll definitely share the recording. I'm happy to share my slides. Yeah. All right. Well, I think without further ado, we'll go ahead and close the first webinar. Thank you everyone for all the thank yous. I feel a lot of gratitude. So it was a pleasure being here with everyone today.
Same here. Thank you very much.
All right, y'all have a good one.